As everyone is now aware, President Joe Biden has withdrawn from the 2024 race, and he is no longer standing for re-election. Vice President Kamala Harris has his endorsement. It appears that she has the delegates necessary at next month's convention for the Democrats in Chicago, so probably she'll be the heir apparent. And then we're going to be talking about who's going to be your vice presidential candidates, how does she fare against Trump, and all that. Those are things that we're going to continue to follow as we get closer through this election season. But I want to look at a more fundamental issue first before much daylight gets underneath this announcement, and that is, should President Biden withdraw from his position entirely? Is he still fit to be the commander-in-chief all the way between now and January of next year? That's a crucial question, which I think not enough people are paying attention to because they're looking at all the manifestations and the machinations of the Democratic Party and how all that's going to work out. But let's not lose sight of what really matters the most. And to look into this today, we have and one of our favorite guests, Doug Macgregor, CEO of Our Country, Our Choice, highly decorated combat veteran, just all around great guy. Doug, welcome back to the show, first of all.
Thanks.
Listen, it's always good to have you on here. And I know, especially because of your position there at Our Country, Our Choice, you care a lot about these issues here. And one of the things I've always respected about you, especially is in your current role there, is that you're looking out for America and not for necessarily for one party over the other. So that kind of puts you in a position to be able to, to have a good, solid point of view on some of these things that is not colored too much by an allegiance to one party or the other. And I actually want to, first of all, just get your view on what's your first impression of when you finally heard that the announcement came down and that he announced he wasn't going to stand for re-election.
Well, I was not surprised, nor would anybody be who'd been watching the situation develop over the last 12 months. I think President Biden has been unable to really campaign effectively for a very long time. So the fact that he's not going to run for re-election is no surprise. The surprise is, why is he still in the Oval Office? I don't think he's up to it physically or mentally. And that's been my primary concern, as you know, from the presentations I've made on the internet, on YouTube, and elsewhere. We definitely need to replace him as soon as possible with someone who's physically and mentally competent to do the job.
Well, and actually, I did want to see it on that. This is, for those who may not have seen it, this is a piece of your one of your YouTube videos, which really cuts right to the heart of the matter.
Every day that President Biden remains in office, we risk further jeopardizing the safety and stability of our country. The role of the president demands sharpness, clarity, and decisiveness, qualities that are essential to navigate the complex and often perilous landscape of global politics. Unfortunately, it has become painfully clear that President Biden no longer possesses these attributes. This is not a partisan issue. It is a matter of national security and integrity.
So I wanted to zero in on that last section there, a matter of national security. Now, a lot of people are looking at this and they're saying, well, it's a matter of, does he have the vigor? Does he have the ability to keep going on? Can he get a sentence out without stumbling through it? But you say it's something more serious than that, something about national security. I wonder what you mean by that.
Well, consider the international environment that the president confronts at the moment. The war in Ukraine has effectively been lost by the Ukrainians and by us, by implication, strategically. But we don't know where this is going to end or how it will end in terms of an eventual territorial settlement. And there are still opportunities for mistakes for the two sides to inadvertently confront each other. One of the things that neither the Russians nor we, I think, for the most part, have wanted to do is directly confront each other. But we have aircraft flying on the ragged edge of confrontation right now. We have problems at sea, in the Black Sea, in the Baltic. And we still have a large number of American personnel, civilian and military, whether they're in uniform or not, operating on the ground in Western Ukraine. So that's one very serious and potentially dangerous situation. Then, of course, the Middle East. The war in Gaza is by no means over, nor is it likely to end anytime soon if we believe Mr. Netanyahu. He's going to speak tomorrow night. I think he's going to try and extract promises from us that we will support him in widening the war to southern Lebanon, Hezbollah, and potentially Iran. So it's really vitally necessary that we have someone in there who is familiar with what's happening, who understands the conditions. Beyond that, we have this open border, which every day is like a metastasizing cancer. More criminality, more trouble, more drugs, more deaths. We've got to have someone in the White House who grasps the larger strategic picture, which is very, very dangerous.
And that's just one area there. You're talking about the Russia-Ukraine war and all that goes on with that. But there's also really, while everybody in Washington and especially within the Democratic Party are focused on, what Kamala is going to do and who's going to be her vice presidential candidate and all that sort of thing. There's lots of things in the Indo-Pacific that are continuing to roil around over there. And that, a lot of that's with the U.S. military forces taking, talking, especially some of their leaders, talking about the potential for war coming up soon. They want more forces on the ground. Then you have, of course, the Chinese on their side taking lots of provocative exercises or so. And it just kind of gets the feel that nobody's really at the helm on that.
Well, I don't think there is, because there is no coherent strategy. We've never had any. It's all being opportunistic, and it looks like the opportunity for confrontation is what we've been seeking. And we are not in a position to do that. Our armed forces are not prepared for the fight. I listened to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who was asked point blank, this is this man, C.Q. Brown, could we defeat China in a war? And he says without hesitation, yes. Well, first of all, what does defeat mean? I mean, you can win and lose at the same time. What would the costs be? What are the circumstances under which something like that could occur? Is that what we want? I don't think it is. So it was not encouraging to me at all. I get the feel that there is no one at the helm. You've got a variety of different people in the cabinet and perhaps major donors on the backside that are also adding their views and attitudes and opinions to the mix. This is not how you govern a major power in the world. And we need to get it under control. So we've got to have a clear, absolutely unambiguous transition of power away from President Biden into the hands of presumably Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, whether people like her or not, whether or not they think she's qualified at this point, is probably irrelevant. She is at least mentally competent and physically fit. So let's put her in the job and then surround her with the most competent advice that can be found. That's what we need to do.
Now, I'm going to look at some of the things about Harris here in a few minutes, but first of all, just really to kind of reinforce why you say that, because a lot of people may hear that and they're thinking, wait, are you serious? You want Kamala Harris in there? Well, it's not a matter of whether I would like to have her. That's what the election's going to decide here coming up soon. But it's a matter of, can the current office holder even do the job? And look, I want to show you something, first of all, that from last February. This was definitely not the first, but it was one of the most major up to that point. And I want you to notice how similar this is to a second clip I'm going to show you right after it. Watch this from February.
There is some movement, and I don't want to maybe choose my words. There's some movement. There's been a response from there's been a response from the opposition, but yes, I'm sorry, from Hamas, but it seems to be a little over the top. We're not sure where it is. There's a continuing negotiation right now.
Now, I've talked to an expert on dementia who's a medical professional, and what I'm told is that the people who are in this condition, the normal brain synapses and the things that we ordinarily use when we're talking, and it goes to certain parts of the brain to pull information out or memories or whatever, you're looking straight ahead, et cetera. But when you're in a dementia situation, there could be like a disconnect from the wires, so to speak, in the brain. And they said that you'll look down and your brain is trying to make that connection. It's kind of looking down until it gets it and pops back up. That was on display in February. Now, watch how similar that is to one that happened last month.
Making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID. With dealing with everything we have to do with look, if we finally beat Medicare,
then he pops up and says something that wasn't even connected with the topic here. So when you see things like that, I mean, can you imagine in the scenario you drew a second ago that something's going on? There was a clash of aircraft or something, and now all of a sudden you have to have the president make a war and peace decision. He can't have that.
Well, I've seen a situation, this is perhaps 2 years ago, where a document was placed in front of President Biden in the Oval Office on the desk. And he looked at it and he began to mumble something. And Kamala Harris leaned over and said to him quietly, but unfortunately loud enough for us to hear it on the scene at the time, "Just sign it." And of course, he then signed it. Again, as I said before, this has been going on for some period of time. This is not new. Right now, given the global situation and given the situation here at home, both people overseas as well as in the United States want to know that the person who is in command is at least reasonably competent to sort through the issues, to listen to advice and make a choice. I don't think we had that with President Biden. I don't think we've had it for a long time. So I don't think that there is any debate. He needs to step down from the office that he holds. And, if he doesn't, we are in a very vulnerable position right now. Let's face it. And weakness abhors, power abhors a vacuum, and that weakness will be identified. That vulnerability will be exploited. So we need to send him on his way to wherever he's going.
Now, I've got some other things to show that, those were from a little bit last. A couple of things I've got to show from the last couple of days. One of which was yesterday. But before I do that, there's something that I would like to address and at least get your view on. In that, okay, so you're talking about something that happened 2 years ago. I showed a clip from this past February, but we know that people on the inside, who are especially his close advisors and his family, whatever, have known this for a long time. There's been no question about what was been going on. People have been talking about it in public for a long time, but publicly, you've had all these Democratic leaders. He's sharp as a tack. His mind is, totally on it. He's brilliant and all this kind of stuff. When they know for sure that that's not the case, what were they trying to accomplish? Because then that leads to the question, who's actually pulling the strings here? And what do you think about that?
Well, lies are always justified based on circumstances that people will insist put the country at risk. In other words, if I tell you the truth, this is what you get from general officers frequently, and the truth gets out, it could destroy morale. It could put us at risk, whatever that means. It could jeopardize the coherence of our operation. Well, you have a similar phenomenon with these political figures. How can I possibly tell the world that the man I just met with, who's president of the United States, is not really competent to perform the job? If I were to do such a thing, that would cause panic. Therefore, I have no alternative but to lie. Well, Dan, you and I both know this is always wrong. Lying is really not called for 99 times out of 100. Churchill famously said that the truth sometimes needs a bodyguard of lies. Well, he was talking about something very different, concealing information from an enemy in the midst of a war. That's not what we're about right now. And we need the truth. And the truth is he's not able to do the job, has not been able to do the job competently for a long time. Now, this leads to your second question. Who is really in charge? Someone said to me the other day, well, George Soros is effectively the national security advisor. I said, what are you talking about? Oh, well, he calls in frequently. I don't know who's in charge. We look at Sullivan. He's the public face as the national security advisor. And remember, he's supposed to be an advisor, not a decision maker. There is an executive order that devolves powers from the president to the national security advisor to approve or disapprove a number of things. For instance, can we provide surveillance for this individual or not? Is this a situation that justifies our surveillance? These kinds of things flow through the Office of the National Security Advisor. he makes those decisions for the president. I'm not sure that's a good idea. One of the things that I looked at when President Trump was still in office was that particular executive order. I think we've got to go back and look carefully at who is doing what, because the majority of people making decisions on a daily basis are not elected. That's important to understand. If they're not elected, then who are they? They're appointed to the positions they hold. What are the real stipulations regarding their authority to do things? Dan, it's a dangerous situation. This is a plot that could have been devised by Tom Clancy or Stephen King, for that matter. I wish I had a good answer. I'm not comfortable with any of it. I think we need to come clean, as they say. The administration needs to come clean, make a decision, break with the past. This is the chain of command now. This is who's in charge. This is who's making the decisions. And as you say, whether we like it or not, Kamala Harris is the vice president. I think this is something people need to think about for the future.
Yeah.
We treat the vice president as a fifth wheel in most cases. He's irrelevant or she's irrelevant. No, they're not. They're supposed to be able to step into the shoes of the president and do the job. Very few vice presidents were picked for that reason. In fact, most of the time, vice presidents are picked for reasons that have nothing to do with qualifications to be president.
Yeah, just how many votes they can help the candidate get. That's like 9 times out of 10, maybe even 10 times out of 10 in recent years. That's
Right.
exactly what it was be for. But you may not be able to answer this because unless you have some insider knowledge from some Democrats or so. But it seems to me that from a practical perspective, even if you're just looking at from the party perspective of what's going to be best for the party, even if you didn't want to put the country first, which is supposed to be the case for all Americans, but in the fact that you've known that Biden has been having these issues, I mean, even back to the first year of his administration, it seems like after the 2022 midterms would have been the absolute perfect point to say, hey, we're going to transition to a new team here. I'm just going to finish out my 2 years here. I'm going to pass the torch on to the young generation, whatever you wanted to say. So now that you have plenty of time to actually get an election going on with the Democrats so they can have their own elections going into the campaign season. Then they could have chosen a new president, vice presidential candidate, et cetera. Everything would have been good. And then they had plenty of time to prepare the groundwork. But instead, they just continued to say everything was fine until it was literally impossible to hide on that debate stage in June. Why? Do you have any idea why they wouldn't have made the move when it was in their interest to do so?
Well, you say in their interest to do so. I don't think it was in their interest to do so. If you've got a rubber stamp for policies like open borders, allowing virtually anyone to march into our country who wants to come in, when you have a situation where Mr. Mayorkas, who's the Homeland Security head, is actively involved with many of the non-governmental organizations, all the way down to Darien in Panama, then you shouldn't be surprised that he's very comfortable with the rubber stamp of the White House to sustain the flow of millions and millions and millions of illegal aliens into the United States. The same thing is true on the military side. If Biden doesn't really understand the implications of his actions, and I don't think he does, I don't think he's done very well at that for a long time, why would he put our own military readiness at risk by shipping virtually everything and anything he's got to Ukraine? Go back and listen to what Joe Biden had to say as president in March or April of 2022, when people asked him, well, are you going to supply this, that, or the next thing? Long-range strike missiles, F-15s, F-16s. And he said, no, absolutely not. That would mean world war. I'm sure you can go back and find it.
Yeah, I remember it.
And within the last 6 to 12 months, what do we get out of him? Sure, we're going to do it. We have to do it. Next question. The man may have had a better grasp of reality at the beginning, but it hasn't lasted very long. And I think people like Blinken and Sullivan and others who are in the cabinet have enjoyed having the rubber stamp. The rubber stamp stops nothing.
Yeah, well, I actually had considered it from that perspective. So if the party was going to do what's best for the nation, they would have made a change earlier. But I guess if there's individuals in certain positions that like that rubber stamp and the autonomy within the administration, then you have a different issue. That raised some
Remember,
other disturbing
you
things.
and I look at the open borders, and we're appalled at what's being done. We can't conceive of it. It's incomprehensible to us. It makes no sense. But the large numbers of people in the White House, in the cabinet, in this government at the moment, they believe this is in the best interests of the future of the United States, because they see this as destroying potentially the majority that is constituted by so-called Native Americans, Americans who are indigenous, the people that are already living here who call themselves Americans. They want to break that up. So from their standpoint, this is good. Again, that's why they want the rubber stamp. The sad part is, how much of this has President Biden ever really understood? I'm not sure he's ever completely grasped the implications of any of these policies.
Yeah, and that again, yet is another disturbing point here, because I'm not sure that would be changed too much if Kamala Harris comes in. But we'll talk about that in just a second. But first of all, okay, so after the debate debacle, and then after the George Stephanopoulos, interview that was supposed to set everybody's mind at ease, and it just raised more alarm bells, and then the NATO press conference that he had at the end, which also included its own share of stumbles, et cetera. After all that, Biden still is not willing to step aside. Everybody keeps saying we in the Democratic Party, you need to step aside, you need to change horses, et cetera. This is what he said. This is his last public speech that he has given to date. And listen to what he says.
Here's my plan for the first 100 days of the second term. Kamala and I are calling on Congress to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. I did all that I was constitutionally able to do with executive authority, but we need the act. And we need to pass the Freedom to Vote Act.
Now, it was just shortly after that he allegedly got COVID and had to go home to rest and recover from that. Then finally the decision was made. And then following that, and this is just yesterday. Well, no, I'm sorry. This is the day before yesterday it was the 17th. I'm sorry. This is the last video that we've had to date. We still haven't had any more video, but this is the last image we saw of President Biden. Watch this, and especially watch the very end of it in his car. So now he's obviously coming down the ramp very slowly there, and not exactly exuding a lot of confidence and strength, or that he's even sure where he's supposed to go. And he seems to be asking people instead of just walking down the ramp. But at the end here, and I think this gets to your comment about the capacity, whether he at one point had some good ideas, whether he knew what he was doing, that's one thing. But the question is, can he actually do it? Now, watch this part here. Now he's getting in the car. You can see his silhouette there, but he can't make it in. He can't get into the seat even. And so somebody's going to reach inside on the inside and kind of help pull him in. He's so frail, he can't even get into his car. And when you see that, you've got to think, now, hang on. Is this someone who has the capacity to even stay in office? Forget about whether he should run in 2020, for 2025 and 2029. I mean, that just is absurd to even say out loud anymore, especially. But we get back to your original premise. Should he stay until October or January of next year?
Well, I think the answer is obviously no. The nation has received, as a result of this, what I would call a black eye. We have a black eye as a country because of the insistence on maintaining the facade that he is something he's not. You can give people of advanced age B12 shots. You can infuse them with other kinds of drugs. You can give them amphetamines. There are all sorts of things that can be done. But you cannot infuse people with mental coherence and consciousness. And in time, it finally gives way. And I think that's where he is at this stage. So I see no alternative to his removal, whether or not he likes it. And frankly, based on experience over the last couple of years, if Kamala Harris puts it in front of him and tells him to sign it, even if it's his own resignation from office, he'll do it.
And I guess just kind of to drive the point home a little bit further, so when just some strange imagery here from Kamala Harris, and we'll start talking about what she may bring to the table here in just a second. But while she's kind of really in a celebratory mood. You don't see her any somber about, maybe having to step in and run this situation on her own or whatever. She seems pretty excited. And at the only public comment that Biden has made to date, he had a phone call. It wasn't even a video. It wasn't a Zoom or anything like that. He had a phone call. But I want you to listen to how his speech is slow and slurred, even more so than we've seen in recent days. Roll this tape.
I want people to remember that what we have done has been incredible, and we get so much more we're going to get done. And so I want to say hello to Kamala, if she can hear me. I know she's going to be speaking shortly. And I want to say to the team, embrace her. She's the best. I want to call today to thank everybody in this effort. I know yesterday's news was surprising, and it was hard for you to hear, but it was the right thing to do. I know it's hard because you poured your heart and soul into me to help us win this thing, help me get this nomination, help me win the nomination, and then go on to win the presidency. But you're an amazing team. But we've got a great. I think we made the right decision.
And with that, you're just wondering what's going to happen, because now tomorrow night, it was announced just shortly before we began this broadcast that President Biden is going to address the nation tomorrow night. And one wonders, is this just going to be where he's, coming forward to people and explaining why he withdrew, or is he going to actually announce that he is withdrawing? We don't know yet. I've heard people on the inside in Washington say it could be either of those. But in any case, it's just very unclear. In any case, it is very clear that he cannot continue on even in the near term. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts on what may happen tomorrow night.
Well, consider this. We reelected Franklin Roosevelt to a fourth term. He lasted exactly 60 days into the fourth term and died. He was a dying man when he was in his third term. He really wasn't fit to hold office at that point. If you read Admiral Leahy's memoir, and Admiral Leahy served as his aide-de-camp and effectively as a surrogate commander-in-chief for FDR during World War II. He had been chief of naval operations. And at the end, he talks about Yalta, where, frankly, at the end of the war, when FDR was talking with Stalin and Churchill, he was barely conscious half the time. He wasn't completely there. He didn't always totally grasp what was happening. After it was over, Leahy asked him, "Are you sure, Mr. President, that the promises that we've accepted from the Soviets will be kept?" He said, "I'm not really sure we can bet on these promises ever being fulfilled." And FDR looked at him and he said, "I'm just too damn tired to fight anymore." If you go back and look at the arrangements made at Yalta, in fact, the conduct of the last 2 years of the Second World War were very consequential for what happens for 50 years after the war. But we went ahead, we allowed the government to function with FDR at the top when he really wasn't up to the task. That was a very serious point in time, and Truman had to step in and take over. Truman had never graduated from college. He was an intelligent man. He wasn't bright and brilliant by any stretch of the imagination. And he knew very little about what was happening because FDR treated him like a red-headed stepchild. He walks in and he's stuck with a very difficult situation. He made the best he could of it. He didn't do badly, frankly, under the circumstances. Do we want to go through that again? I hope that in the future, when we begin to vote, that people are going to look not just at the president, but also at the vice president and ask themselves, especially since Donald Trump is, 78 years of age or 79, how much longer will he last? Well, we could assume he's going to be very robust and physically fit. I don't think he is, but we can assume that will be the case, but you don't know. So now we have a 39-year-old senator in his first term from Ohio who is poised to replace him if something goes wrong, terribly wrong, horribly wrong. I don't know what will happen on the other side with Kamala Harris and whomever runs with her. The bottom line is we can't continue this nonsense.
Yeah.
It just doesn't work.
Well, and we can't undo the 2020 nonsense, but we have what we have here. And as you say, this is now a stark realization of why what you're saying is so important, that the vice presidential candidate has to be somebody who is genuinely capable of stepping in. Because right now, and this is what I want to look at a little bit, because I think that, in my view, there's no chance that Biden makes it to the next transition to January. I don't think there's any chance, whether he accepts it or not, or something, his health just literally falls apart. We'll see. So we'll see what happens tomorrow night. But the likelihood, in my view, is that there will be a President Kamala Harris sooner rather than later. So let's look at what that's going to mean. Now, look, I know that she's trying to be cool and whatever, but here's this video that's kind of trending around. A lot of people are looking at it right now about her, and this is one of many, where she's just kind of dancing around. And again, this is kind of while Joe Biden is apparently with COVID, and he's trying to decide whether he's going to stay in the race, and she's just out partying it up, having a good time. And Doug, impressions matter. And when you're talking about the potential to go and face Xi Jinping in China with some tough negotiations, or Vladimir Putin, of course, which could very much be the case even in the near term here, Kim Jong-un, I mean, you name it, even some of our Western allies, it just is not a good look when you seem to be just enjoying the position and not showing yourself as a serious statesman in charge of the most powerful nation on the planet.
Well, these are the perils of this thing that we call democracy. Presidents really need experience in 4 key areas. One, with the armed forces, in command of them, or at least experience in them for some period of time. They need to have an appreciation and understanding of the economy, how it functions, what works, what doesn't. You then have to have experience in domestic politics. That's very clear. And then I would say, finally, you need some understanding of the international system. Who are the people out there? You mentioned Xi Jinping, Putin, Vladimir Putin. There are whole numbers of key actors. What are their interests? How do they think? How do they behave? The last time we had a president that had 3 out of 4 of those areas under the belt was Eisenhower. I would argue that Nixon had perhaps 2, maybe 3 of them. But otherwise, in most cases, all people come to the office of the presidency with experience in one area, domestic politics. That's Kamala Harris's background. She doesn't know anything about the armed forces. She doesn't know anything about, I would argue, the economy, how it functions, how it works, its mechanisms. And I don't think she has the slightest idea how the international system works and who's in it and what people's interests are. So I'm afraid this is the perils of the way we've set the system up. We reward and elevate people who know how to get elected inside the United States. That's it.
Well, and by the way, I just want to point out that video, though it's trending right now, it was actually from, as I understand, from 2020. But that doesn't change the fact, because she was still running to be vice president back then. And the things she's done since have just added to that. So I think that still stands. But then that does get
clear. What she was doing makes sense from a domestic standpoint.
Yeah.
That's something that many voters will see and say, oh, she's a regular person. That's a good thing. Has nothing to do with governing.
Right. Yeah, that's important to distinguish between those. And that gets to the next issue I wanted to talk about, which you've also been out there publicly, and that is with the voting itself. Not just who is selected as a candidate, who you voted for, but the process of voting as well. And you released a video recently on what the government should do on the SAFE Act that's voting, and I want to get into a little bit of that. I'm going to show a clip of what you talked about there, and then I want to talk about, I want you to expand a little bit on why it's necessary. Watch this.
Few Americans are aware, but a short time ago, Democrats as well as Republicans raised questions about the conduct of federal elections. In 2018, then Senator Kamala Harris, now Vice President Harris, demonstrated how easy it was to hack election machines. Senator Amy Klobuchar echoed these concerns, pointing out that only 3 companies control most voting machines, and these machines are vulnerable to hacking.
Now, Doug, because there was all what happened with the 2020 election, and and all the claims that it was unlawful or whatever, and how all the Democrat parties was really good to go. It's hard to remember that the Democrats were leading the charge on this just one cycle. Before that, you mentioned Amy Klobuchar. Here's what she said.
Let me get you to respond to something the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coates, said about this election. Take a listen, Senator.
Our focus here today is simply to tell the American people we acknowledge the threat. It is real, it is continuing, and we're doing everything we can to have a legitimate election that the American people can have trust in.
Senator, I have to say it's that last phrase that sort of sent a little bit of a shiver down my spine. So that we can have a legitimate election. It wasn't a guarantee yet. How confident are you that the 2018 midterm elections are going to be legitimate?
I'm very concerned that you could have a hack that finally went through.
And so, that's probably what you were referring to there, where she straight up said that, as well as Kamala Harris with some of the other issues, which they don't seem to think about anymore. So what has or hasn't happened with election security since she made that comment?
Nothing. If we go back to the election in 2000, where people were trying to sort through things called hanging chads in Florida, and it was a ridiculous exercise. By the time it was over, the Democrats were absolutely convinced that the election had been stolen from them by George W. Bush. And they had a point. I don't know that it was necessarily stolen, but frankly, it raised serious questions about the validity of the electoral process. Now, let's go forward to 2016. Again, there were questions then about the validity of votes being cast. Amy Klobuchar brought it up. She's right. She said, I don't have high confidence. There is no reason today for anyone to have high confidence in the validity of our electoral process. Nothing has changed of substance since 2020.
And so what needs to happen? What are you advocating?
Well, I gave a detailed outline in that presentation, but the point that I was trying to make is, first of all, do we really want election integrity? One side seems to want it, but both sides never want it at the same time.
Yeah.
In other words, one side wants it when they think they'll benefit from it. The other side is happy that the electoral process is flawed if it works to their advantage. That's unacceptable. There has to be an understanding that, no, this won't work. We got to get past all these ridiculous notions that, grandma is 92. She really wants to vote in the election, but she's ambulatory. She can't get there. Well, tell grandma, I'm sorry, but grandma can't go and vote then. In other words, stop all the nonsense with this ballot harvesting of absentee ballots. Stop this business with machines. We've been down this road so many times. The French have had problems with online voting. All the Europeans have tried this. Sometimes it works well. Most of the time it doesn't. The French ultimately threw it out. We need to go to a system that's very straightforward. Number one, 48 hours of voting should be possible. And it should be done over a weekend. It should start at 6 a.m. on Saturday and end at 6 p.m. on Sunday. In other words, on those 2 days, you can go and vote whenever whenever you can get away to vote. You're no longer walking away from work or anything else. We don't need a special holiday for it. So that's the first thing. Second thing, you've got to vote in person. I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. And you've got to show up and demonstrate conclusively that you're a citizen of the United States. And what I would recommend that we do, and what I did recommend in the presentation I made, is that we have voter ID cards. And you go to the police station, a police station designated by the governor of the state in which you live. You go to that police station, and they will issue you a voter ID card when you present to them your birth certificate, proof of residence in the area, and or a passport. Then he'll say, okay, or she will say, fine, this is your voter ID card. That's your voter ID number. Here's your photograph. If they want to fingerprint them, they can do that. I could care less. But the point is, go to the police station and get this done. Then when it's time to vote, you show up with your card and say, hey, this is me. I'm an American citizen. I live here. I want to vote. And then you can vote. End of discussion. Then you make sure that you have representatives from all the political parties involved in the election. Today, it's not just Republicans and Democrats. We have independents, libertarians, and so forth. They should all look at the card and confirm, yes, you are the one, you live here, you can vote. Get rid of these stupid voter rolls that are always out of date, that contain the numbers of dead people that have long since departed this earth that magically show up and vote every presidential election. All that needs to go away. You set this up. And that's the end of it. You have to do it in person. And the only people that get absentee ballots are people serving away from home in the United States military on active duty. Now, that's why absentee voting was created. It was created during the Civil War for the election of 1864, because someone said, well, wait a minute, all these soldiers fighting in the United States Army for the Union need to have the opportunity to vote. Are they going to vote for Abraham Lincoln, or are they going to vote for George McClellan, the ever popular general who wanted to make peace? Well, they voted overwhelmingly for Lincoln, even though they knew, many of them, that their lives would be lost before the Civil War ended. They voted for the man that wanted to fight for the Union. It's history. That worked. We need to go back to that system. Forget the rest of it. And I think then you can have a free and fair election. And you need to use paper ballots. You know,
okay. And let me ask you,
it has 1 billion people in it. I think the number was over 700 million people voted in India. And within 24 hours using paper ballots at the polling stations, they had a result. We should get a result. As soon as that 48-hour period is over, you open up the lock boxes, which is where all the ballots go. You open those up, you count them, and you do it in sight of all the members of the political parties. And then you announce who's won. End of discussion. This is not hard. Stop the nonsense. Well, this will harm people of color. What do you mean it's harming people of color? I served with people of color in the Army. So did you. They were Americans. They have birth certificates. They have evidence for their citizenship. They should vote. They can go to the police station and get an ID, a voter ID card too. That's a lot of nonsense. That needs.
Okay, so let me ask you this question, because one of the biggest, I guess, I'm not sure if roadblocks is the right word. Maybe it is. On the opposite side of that viewpoint is that there is a big resistance to saying that only American citizens should vote. Now, to me, it just seems self-evident that every country on the planet, they limit voting to just whoever's their citizen. So you don't have people coming from somewhere else, which could slant the election in different ways. It seems logical and self-evident. Why are so many people against saying, no, there should be an ID so that whoever is voting is who is supposed to be voting, has been validated as being a citizen and valid or authorized to vote? Why is that a hard issue?
It has not always been uniformly enforced. That's the first thing. Remember, the Constitution says the states are responsible for the conduct of elections. The reason that decision was made is very simple. At the time the Constitution was written and signed, the states had money. In other words, the colonies, they had active tax revenues. They had sitting members of their respective houses of parliament and so forth, governors. We didn't have that at the federal level. There was almost no federal government at the end of the revolution. Remember, we disbanded the Continental Army, didn't even pay the people that had fought so hard for us for many years. That's then. This is now. We need to get out of the 18th century and live in this century. And we need to understand that the states, many of them have caught up. For instance, in the state of Florida, it explicitly says, if you are not a U.S. citizen, you must not vote or should not vote in the election. But then again, is it rigorously enforced all the time? That's the problem. You have to have penalties set up. If it can be proven that you or you have helped someone other than you vote who is not a citizen, there should be a mandatory jail sentence. End of discussion. You go to jail for 3 years. That would stop a lot of it. We have to have penalties as well as explicit laws. People don't want to do it because they think if I do this, I'm going to be called a racist, a bigot, or something else. It doesn't matter what you do. If you exercise your responsibilities as a citizen and you do what is right, you're going to be called something somebody doesn't like. We have to get out of that.
Why is there such a, because I see this all the time without explanation. They say, no, that is a racist policy if you make people like get an ID card to be able to validate who they are when they're voting. But no one is denying any race or color or ethnicity or anything else ability to get ID cards. They all have ID cards, whether it's driver's license or anything else. You can't get a bank account without it. There's a lot of things you can't do without it. Why the resistance when it comes to voting to just validate that you are who you say you are?
Well, I think parties, particularly the Democrats, certainly since the end of the 19th century and through much of the 20th, view themselves as having benefited from relaxed enforcement. In other words, benefiting from cheating. And it's reached the point now where in many states, you know this, you have one-party cities. There's only one party in New York City. There's only one party in Philadelphia. There's only one party in Chicago. When you go to a one-party system because everybody else has left, what have you got? You've got a dictatorship. There's no longer any democracy per se. And that's what's happened in many of the big cities. So the whole rule of law as we understand it, that we depended upon for so many hundreds of years, has frankly broken down in many areas. And people don't want to enforce it. They want things to stay the way they are.
Right. But it doesn't make any sense to me. And it's just something that's always been kind of a burr under my saddle as to why anybody wants to say that. That comment that we just had up there by one of our viewers, it's like, look, I'm not, nobody's racist against me because I have a black and an ID card.
Now, you will find if you go back into the 19th century, particularly in the years after the Civil War, in territories in the West that had not yet become states, many people there were recently arrived from Europe. They were not yet citizens, and they were allowed to vote in local elections. And that was simply because they lived there. They had come in, they lived there, they had established homesteads, stores, whatever. And they said, well, they live here, so they need to be part of this process. Eventually, they became citizens. But the point was, at the time, those decisions were made on a local basis. That's not the foundation for national government in the 21st century. What we just described, issuing a voter ID card explicitly to an individual that you know is an American citizen in a police station, and you put it in a police station because the police are not motor voters. In other words, it's not vehicle registration where somebody says, well, he's my friend, I'm going to give him a card. He may not be a citizen, but he's a friend, so I'm going to let him do this. You know, this motor voter business spits out ballots for people who are not citizens. Many aliens live in the United States legally, and they're allowed to vote. They should not be allowed to vote. And again, this sort of relaxed enforcement is common in many states. We've got to stop it. No one wants to go there right now, but we've got to. And the open border has presented us with the greatest single threat to governing ourselves that we have had in many, many years. I would say the greatest single threat to the United States since the Civil War. We have 52 million people inside the United States, at least 52. These are the ones we know about, who were not born in the United States. Large numbers of them are illegally here. Some of them are legally here. But those who are not citizens should not vote. And when they vote, they disenfranchise you, me, and every other American citizen who's out there.
Yeah. Well, that's the scope of this is quite big, and so we certainly believe that whatever the laws are, they need to be followed, and that's one of the things that's not done. It's sporadic, literally all over the country. In the time we have left here, Doug, I want to shift over to one more topic because it's so poignant and it's making news even just in the last few hours, and that is on the assassination investigation into the July 13th. Attempted assassination of President Trump, and the director there Kimberly Cheadle has resigned today. Now, there was some real issues and a lot of sparks that were going along yesterday. And while I certainly think it's appropriate for her to have resigned based on what has happened, that should not shut down the hard questions that have been coming. And there was a few that I want to raise with you that happened yesterday and kind of get where you're coming down on these. Number one, and I'm going to show this video here where the issue of the shell casings and how many there were by the shooter is something that Cheadle knew and something that she expressly refused to provide the answer to. Watch this.
Did they share with you how many shell casing were on the roof?
Yes.
Okay, how many were there?
I would refer to the FBI for
How
their
many
investigation
were there?
and their information that they need to share in their investigation.
So they've shared the information with you. You just don't want to share the information with us, correct?
We have concurrent investigations that are going on.
So they have shared this information with you. You know the answer to the question. You just refuse to answer the question.
Now, one of the reasons why that's so important is because lots of evidence is starting to pile up with acoustic evidence and otherwise that maybe there were two shooters on there. And so on that day, and if there are 8 shell casings, then you can say, oh, well, there must have only been one because he's the guy who fired them and there they are. But if there's less than that, if there's only 5 or 6 instead of 8 or 9, then we have a real problem. So are you concerned with the fact that she won't tell that number that she knows?
Of course. 3 things. First of all, this person, Cheadle, was selected, as far as we can tell, on the basis of cronyism, which is not unusual in politics. But she was given the job because she was a quote-unquote friend of Dr. Jill Biden. This sort of thing is a problem in politics. It needs to stop. There is no test for character competence or intelligence right now. Every conceivable reason is found to appoint someone to a high office for which they are ostensibly unqualified. We need to put an end to that. This is the tip of an iceberg. The second thing is we have had no formal briefing presented to us, even on the basis of preliminary findings. We could have had a briefing from the Justice Department, in theory, that would have said, this is what we have found so far. We're confident in saying these things. We do not know everything yet. Right now, this looks like it's on its way to becoming another Warren Commission, where we're never going to get the truth, because the truth is damning, and the truth involves other actors in and out of government that we do not want to be known. And when I say we, I'm talking about the federal government, the current administration. I hope not. But when you deal with this kind of obfuscation, you have to assume there's something very, very wrong here. There's more to it than what we know, or someone would have said something by now. Correct?
Yeah, and people have been saying some things, and then that leads to there was a bunch of things from yesterday's hearings, and I don't want to get into all of them, but that shell casing was a huge one because it can either put to rest or expand the thought that there was a second shooter. And then this other one here also is troubling because it talks about recorded communications and their absence here and why that is. Watch this.
Depending on the detail, radio communications are recorded.
Does the Secret Service have recorded communications from the July 13th event?
We do not have radio communications from that day.
But you have text messages?
We do have emails and text messages.
Emails, okay, great.
And look, having those communications would answer also a lot of questions, but their absence means it's possible for you to just continue on to say really anything that you'd like, and not provide any evidence, because like for one of the specific things I've already talked about a couple of times on other shows is the fact that 2.5 minutes or over 2 minutes before the first shot was fired, the Southern counter sniper team picked up its southern focus and turned to the north, like someone told them to move up that west. But she said in her testimony that it was only seconds before the shot before they finally realized someone was on the roof. So something isn't jiving, and those communications would have answered that question, but now apparently they don't have them. So one would basically say that now then you can literally claim anything you want to.
I would be very surprised if the National Security Agency did not record those conversations over the radio. Pardon me, but color me skeptical. I think the transcript exists somewhere. And I think that it would probably help answer these questions. I don't know whether or not we'll ever get a look at the real emails or text messages for that matter. But I'm sure that there were cell phone calls as well as radio communications. And I frankly assume that they were recorded by someone somewhere in the National Security Agency. They record everything else. You know, we're listening today to something called the Vivona intercepts. These were recorded conversations between Stalin, Churchill, and FDR. Think about that. And they were classified for decades. Now we have access to them in a wonderful book called Stalin's War by a Professor McMeekin, or McMeechan. I don't know how they pronounce it. McMeekin, I think. Sean McMeekin at Bard University or Bard College in Northern New York. If we've got those, I'm sure we have these. And my point is, there's a reluctance to tell the truth right now. And the longer that this persists, the more speculation will occur. And the greater people will doubt the truth of anything the government tells them. And let's face it, trust in the government right now, particularly in the Justice Department and in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, is at an all-time low. I see no evidence that any of this is going to improve that situation.
Right. Yeah. And that is one of the bigger concerns. And really the ramifications of what I'm even suggesting here are quite disturbing. If anyone associated with that team had any kind of a knowledge about a threat, that there was something besides Thomas Crooks on top of that building, who couldn't even make a high school shooting team, but he made a kill shot on the first shot when he'd been captured. I mean, there's just so many things that don't line up, but the implications that there was somebody else means who else was involved in this, and they're still out there apparently. So it is vital that we get these answers.
Consider this. I'd be very surprised if the Russians, the Chinese, the Israelis, others that have access to satellite-based communications and surveillance do not have some insider understanding or knowledge of what went on. You know, frankly, I think that's a very high probability. The worst thing, of course, that could happen would be for a foreign government to suddenly reveal the truth of what happened. That could occur in the near future. The problem we have right now, you have no integrity in terms of elections. There isn't much integrity when it comes to governing. We're in a very serious situation. This is a huge crisis of legitimacy for Washington, D.C. and the people in government. You would think there would be some sensitivity to this, but I suppose Americans have been so tolerant and so relaxed in the way they treat these kinds of events for so long that the people in Washington don't seem to feel compelled to come forward with the truth.
Well, I mean, yeah, there's been lots of people that are understandably reluctant to come forward with the truth, because when they see that some people, and especially if Crooks was a dupe here, and I don't have enough information to know that, things are skeptical. But when they see that some people like that do, or others who have come forward in other whistleblower issues in the past and then suddenly mysteriously died, you can understand why some people would be reluctant to that. But we do need that kind of stuff, because without people coming forward who know the truth, we all remain in peril, and that's just the truth of it, I think.
Well, right now, I think that peril is greater than it's ever been in our history, and I hope that we will get to the bottom of this, because we need to, or we're not going to be able to move on to any sort of plausible government in the future that the American people will believe and support. So right. I think it's very, very important that this be addressed forthrightly and immediately. But there's not a whole hell of a lot of evidence right now that that's going to happen.
Yeah, there's not a lot of evidence. In fact, I've seen that many of the major media are really quick to say, "Oh, there's definitely no second shooter. All that's been debunked, et cetera." And the eagerness with which they're saying that, in the absence of any kind of an investigation to prove whether there was or wasn't, is more evidence to me that there is something, and they want to suppress it and shut it up. But that's why I agree with you when you say right now it doesn't look like it's going to happen. But we'll keep asking the questions, and apparently many on the Hill will. So we'll see if they get any answers subsequent to this.
I hope so. I hope so.
And we certainly do too. Thank you for coming on so much today, Doug. Is just wanted to ask if there's anything more going on with our country, our choice that you want to highlight here for our viewers, because we always love to hear what's going on with OCOC.
Well, right now we're on the precipice of launching a new IT platform that we think is going to revolutionize free speech in the United States. It's called Republic. It's going to be free for anyone who simply wants to go on the platform and read and study and view the material that's there, because it's going to focus on as much as we can ensure that it is fact-based news and analysis, but also real-time film footage of events and people. But it's also an opportunity, if you decide you want to become a quote-unquote activist and pay the annual fee, you can get on there and you can actually post your own videos, post your own material, create spaces, whether you're an organization or an individual. This is a free speech platform. And we're not saying what you have to believe or not to believe. The only stipulation we have is that you have to love the United States. In other words, we're not going to tolerate somebody who comes on the platform and says, I'm here to find ways to destroy America. They're going to be gone. Or if you try to use it for pornographic reasons or other ostensibly illegal purposes, otherwise you can go on there. I mean, Nancy Pelosi can go on and create her space and promote her views as readily as Candace Owens or Ben Shapiro or anybody else. And it's also an opportunity for people across the country to communicate with each other, because you can communicate directly. You can organize meetings. You can send messages. If something happens where you live and you want to contact a congressman, you can go to the site. It'll take you to your congressman, the individual that is supposed to respond to your interests and needs. And you can text them, you can email them, you can call them, whatever you want, right from the platform. Wow. Everybody in your precinct, in your county, in your town, in your city, in your state can do it. And across states, you can organize this sort of thing. I think it's going to scare the hell out of people that don't really want free speech. But I think Americans will love it. It's called Republic. And I think you'll see it out available mid-August to late August, before Labor Day. So when Labor Day hits, this bomb will go off. And people will be able to tell the truth, what they see, what they think, and exchange their views. Wow, I think it's a very positive thing.
Yeah, they're awesome. We'll definitely.
And there's no advertisement on this thing. We're not taking money from anybody to keep this rolling. So you got to pay that annual fee. Now, there's an annual fee of $180 unless you go to somebody like me. I have a discount code, and you can get on there for $120. And there are others around the country that will have access to these discount codes. We'll post them on our websites and so forth. And you can get on there, and I think the world is at your disposal. And we're already getting inquiries from Europe and Asia.
Oh, wow.
About how they can participate. We're able, we think right now, to cope with 200 million users. We have private servers. So I think this is going to work, but I think it's the beginning of a revolution. We've really got to get past all these places like Google or YouTube or somewhere else where someone decides they don't like what you have to say and cut you off, reduce your access.
We get a lot of that on our channel, by the way. I've seen a lot of our subscribers talk about they want to make comments and Google somehow knocks it out.
But again, as long as the comments they make are not lewd, in other words, we don't need the foul language and anything pornographic, and it's not threatening in the sense that we hate America, we're going to destroy the country and everybody like you, this kind of nonsense. Otherwise, you're on there. You can say what you think. I think we desperately need it, because history teaches that if you suppress the truth and you suppress public opinion long enough, eventually it explodes in your face in the form of a revolution. So
yeah,
I think this is a good thing.
Sounds great. And we're big advocates of that here. We'll definitely be trying to shovel people in your direction because most of our people love the ability to have freedom of expression, because we got a lot in here that don't agree with some of us, but they're welcome here. And I'm sure they'll be welcome on your channel as well.
Absolutely. You got it.
All right,
Thanks.
cool. Well, Thanks ever so much, Colonel. Appreciate having you on, and always grateful for you guys. Be sure to like and subscribe, and folks, we're going to have some more great shows later this week. We have John Mearsheimer back, I think, on tomorrow. Ambassador Freeman on Thursday, and we've got some other new guests coming on that you haven't seen before that are going to be talking about a lot of the political things in the United States. So a lot coming down the pike here. Please do keep coming back. You will be very glad you did. Thanks. We'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.